Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a podcast by Practical E-Commerce.
This is Kerry Murdock with Practical E-Commerce. Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations. Every day, it seems, we read of an internet-based company acquiring another one, or raising capital, or expanding into a new segment. Mergers and acquisitions for internet companies are booming. To explain it all to us, we're joined by Evan Klein, a managing director of Berkery Noyes, a leading M&A advisory firm. Well, Evan, thank you for your time today.
No, I appreciate it, Kerry. Thanks for the opportunity to talk with you.
Evan, your company, for which you're the managing director, Berkery Noyes, an investment firm, just released its mergers and acquisitions trend report for the online and mobile industry for the first 6 months of this year. My first question for you today, Evan, is what is the state of mergers and acquisitions for that segment?
It's actually been a great first half of the year. In our report, we noted that the transaction volume in the first half of 2014 increased by over 7% from the last 6 months of 2013, and it went from over 1,100 transactions to 1,227 transactions for the first 6 months of the year. When we look at transaction volume for the first half of 2014, it rose by 57% over the second half of 2013. It went from $40.8 billion to over $64 billion. And another interesting fact, when we look at the median revenue multiple, although that remained constant at 2.3 times, when we look at the median EBITDA multiple, that increased from 9.5 times in the second half of 2013 to 12.5 times in the first half of 2014. And as you know, this report focuses on a number of segments, including e-commerce, e-content, and e-marketing. The most active segment during this 6-month period was the e-marketing and search segment, which had 336 transactions for the 6-month period, and that was a 17% increase over the last 6 months of 2013.
When you say a transaction, so there's 1,200 total transactions, what exactly do you mean by a transaction?
Well, we track in this particular sector, every transaction where there's a buyer and a seller, and where there's a disclosed price, and so that would count again. And if you look at sort of the largest transaction that happened in this sector, it was Facebook acquiring WhatsApp, so that would be considered one transaction.
So it's not like the issuance of debt. It's an actual acquisition, one way or the other.
Right. These are M&A transactions that we're counting.
Tell us some of those. Thank you for that summary, by the way. Of those 1,200, the 1,200 roughly for the first 6 months, what are some that stand out? You just mentioned Facebook's acquisition of WhatsApp. What are some other notable names that perhaps our listeners may have heard of?
Well, that one was, by far the largest. That was over $16 billion in value, and over and above that, there was another $3.5 billion in stock that's vested over time. A transaction I think a lot of your community might know of is, Priceline acquired OpenTable for $2.4 billion. That was a very large transaction, the second largest that happened in the market. And then similarly, TripAdvisor acquired La Fourchette, which was a European-based online booking platform, and that transaction was for $140 million. The other interesting fact that we looked at was if we looked at the last 24 months, who was the most active acquirer, and it turns out that eBay made 8 acquisitions over the last 24 months in the sector that we focused on for this 6-month period.
Our audience, of course, Evan, for the most part, our audience would be e-commerce merchants that are selling physical products on kind of a one-off transactional basis. So the examples you just mentioned there of some notable transactions. You mentioned the WhatsApp acquisition, one of Priceline's acquisitions, and TripAdvisor's acquisitions. That would be kind of mobile travel related sectors, if I could use that term. What do you see for just pure play e-commerce merchants that are selling and shipping physical products? What's the state of that market?
Well, I think in general it's a good market for M&A. Again, both financial buyers and strategic buyers are flush with cash, so I think that's a very good platform to work off of. We think when you look at the companies that are being purchased, most, if not all, have a good mobile solution/strategy. We think that's a very important channel for an e-commerce company, and ideally one that your customers have focused on and have established, a strong strategy. As it relates specifically to e-commerce of goods, Andy Dunn recently wrote a very interesting article, and Andy is the CEO of Bonobos, which is an online e-commerce company. He does a great job of summarizing what he thinks and what we actually agree with in terms of for an e-commerce to successfully navigate in what is today a very competitive market. And, we think if you try to compete just on price against the likes of Amazon, that's a very difficult proposition. But he did come up with 4 strategies that made a lot of sense to us and that we, like I said before, agree with. His first strategy was, for the company to have proprietary pricing. An example of that would be the Gilt Group, Thrillist, and Rue La La, or other flash sale companies that offer temporary price breaks on goods. So they're offering, again, at specific times, a unique set of goods at unique pricing. The second strategy that he looked at was sort of a company that had proprietary selection, a site that has a very narrow but deep focus for a particular audience. Examples that he gave were such companies as ModCloth, which focuses on vintage clothing, or Nasty Gal. Again, the merchandise might not be exclusive, but you get the feel that it's an exclusive set of products that are being offered by the website. The third strategy they looked at was sort of a site that had a proprietary experience. Sites that created new models of engagement for their customers. Sites as Birchbox, which is a beauty discovery platform, or JustFab, which focuses on shoes or bags. These sites offer customers a monthly subscription service. And again, we think it's a new business model that's very interesting in the e-commerce world. And finally, he looked at a fourth strategy, which was a company that had proprietary merchandise. These are sites that are trying to build their own brands with e-commerce as its core distribution channel. An example would be Bonobos, which, again, he is CEO of, and they focus on menswear. And a lot of folks have also heard of Warby Parker, which focuses on eyewear. But when we look at the market, again, we think it has to be a unique differentiation, and those 4 categories: proprietary pricing, proprietary selection, proprietary experience, or proprietary merchandise, seem to be a focus of the companies today that we view as successful in the e-commerce arena.
That's interesting. And that's the CEO of Bonobos.
Right, and his name is Andy Dunn.
To a degree, I think you've just answered the next question I was going to ask, which I was going to pose a kind of a hypothetical to you here, and it's this. Say I'm an e-commerce merchant that sells a physical product in a niche market. What should I do to prepare my company for sale? And I think you just said do these 4 strategies. Would that be your answer to that question? Or?
Well, be part of it, because you assume you have to have a successful company, and to be successful, I'm not saying you have to have one of those 4 strategies. Is that he looked at the market over a very long time, and we've been spending a significant amount of time as well looking at it, and so we agreed with his view of the market. But so I say that's a given, because if you're not successful, you're not going to be able to look at a potential sale. The other factor that I tell a lot of companies that we speak with, before, as we're discussing potential sale mandates a year from now or 2 years from now, is to establish a strong board of directors. Find members of the community that you think could add value to your company, that complement your skill set, and invite them to be part of your board of directors. Hold quarterly meetings, ask for their opinions, ask for their feedback. Again, find experts, if you can, that are willing to spend time with you, whether it's for cash or for stock in your company, but that really round out a management team that you've developed. We also tell companies that it's very important to run your company like you're going to be for sale tomorrow. And what does that mean? That means have financial information available. Keep very good records. If you don't have audited financial statements, speak to an accountant about getting reviewed financial statements. Most companies that make acquisitions really want to know that the numbers you're sending them have been confirmed by an outside CPA firm. And the third thing we tell people is really focus at what point in time should you go to market in terms of selling your company. And ideally, you're picking a time where the trends in your company are very strong, sales increasing rapidly, the customer acquisition is going very well, the sector is doing exceptionally well. Try to time it so that you're taking advantage of sort of market or specific company dynamics.
Stepping back just for a sec, what is your overall view of the online retail industry?
Again, I think it's very, very competitive. I think if you look at the success of Amazon and all the companies that tried to compete with them, the successful ones like Zappos or Diapers.com they acquired. But there was thousands and thousands of companies that either went out of business or are struggling because Amazon has built up, the largest distribution system. They could afford to price the products on very thin margins because, again, they're in this for the next 100 years. And like Andy said, I think at some point they'll be the largest retailer, certainly in the country and potentially the world. And so they could afford to have a very long-term strategy in terms of pricing their goods. And like it goes back to the four strategies, to try to compete with them on price, you're not going to win.
Let's talk about your firm for a sec. Evan, you're a managing director of Berkery Noyes, which is a mergers and acquisitions firm. Could you tell us about your company?
I think that's it. Our firm has been in business 30 years. We have 25 professionals. We're an independent investment bank. We provide M&A advisory services to middle market companies. One of the sectors I cover is online media, and within that we look at the e-commerce arena as being part of that sector. So we have very strong coverage in the sectors that we focus on. We also raise capital for companies. We've closed over 500 transactions as a firm, and we close about 20 transactions a year. And again, I think when you look at our organization, each member of the senior management team, the managing directors, all have 20-plus years of experience. So it's a very deep group of senior professionals that have, very long history within the sectors that they cover.
We addressed a minute ago what an e-commerce merchant should do to prepare his company for an eventual sale. To follow up on that question, how would you determine as a professional, an M&A professional, how do you determine valuation for a company?
That's a great question. There's three methodologies that most bankers use in determining value. One, you look at the company and you try to find other public companies that are similar to that company. So again, that gives you some indication of what the public markets value a company in a specific space. The second methodology we use is we look at past M&A transactions, again, for a similar company as possible to the one in question. So if there's another company out there like WhatsApp, we would sort of look at the Facebook transaction as just one of as many transactions as we can find. Again, when you're looking at such a large transaction, generally the leader in the space, there's a premium paid for that. But again, we try to find 10, 15, 20 transactions that are similar to the one that we're looking at to come up with how in the public markets other companies have been valued from an M&A perspective. And the third methodology is called the discount cash flow methodology, and that's where we look at projections based on management's belief over the next 3 to 5 years in terms of how they're going to perform. We look at the cash flows generated from those revenue streams, and then we discount those cash flows back at a discount value that takes into consideration the risk that a potential buyer is going to take on by buying that company. And generally, we look at all three of those methodologies and come up with our best guess in terms of value of that organization. So we look at the public market comps, we look at public M&A transactions, and then we look at the DCF. And together, it gives you a pretty good sense of how to value an organization.
What if a company comes to you, Evan, that has developed a revolutionary technology, if I could use that term, and there is no precedent, and there is no comps, and it's a technology that in your company's view is going to rewrite or disrupt another industry? What method would you apply to that?
Well, it becomes much more challenging when you're talking early-stage companies. Again, there's always some example of another company. It might not be the exact same industry, but someone that's come up with technology that's revolutionized a particular industry. I think the challenge is, finding a believer, finding a strategic acquirer that could see and validate that technology and can realize how valuable that piece of technology is, and they could come up with their own analysis of the cash flow that could be generated if they incorporate that technology into their product or service. We would try to do the same. It's just a matter of understanding sort of how that technology is going to revolutionize an industry. Is it going to decrease cost dramatically? Is it going to facilitate more ad views? I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into it, but the goal is to come up with projections and then discount those at an applicable discount rate to take into consideration the risk that the revenue streams that you're predicting don't come true. But I think it becomes much more challenging to value companies when they're early stage because, again, you don't have as much comparable information.
Evan, we have just another minute or so left in our time today. Anything else on your mind?
No, I think the only other interesting fact that we covered in our report is that we looked at the transactions based on the number of transactions and the value of transactions. And what we found is if you look at on the volume of transactions, the strategic community purchased 87% of all transactions, the 1,200 transactions that we looked at for the first 6 months. Now, if you looked at it in terms of deal value, the strategics purchased 72% based on deal value. And that's very, very typical because we found that financial investors tend to pursue larger transactions on average than strategic acquirers. And the only other point that I would add that it's a good environment, like I mentioned early on for M&A. It's also a good environment to raise capital to help companies that need additional capital to add from a technology standpoint, from a sales and marketing standpoint, an infrastructure standpoint. It's just a very good environment today to raise capital.
To follow up on what you just said, a strategic investor would be like a competitor? Or
a competitor or another company that's has a complementary product or service that can take what you've developed and add it, incorporate it into its existing organization. So strategic means it's not a financial institution that just manages capital on behalf of third parties. It's an operating company is how we view a strategic acquirer.
Okay. Well, for purposes of our listeners, we've been visiting with Evan Klein. Evan is the managing director of Berkery Noyes, which is a mergers and acquisition firm. Evan specializes in the online and mobile segments of that firm. The website of Berkery Noyes is just that, berkerynoyes.com. Let me spell that. That's B as in boy, E-R-K-E-R-Y, Noyes, N as in Nancy, O-Y-E-S, berkerynoyes.com. And Evan Klein, a managing director for that firm. We want to thank you for your time today, sir.
Thanks, Kerry, and greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your audience.